It is Tuesday here on Tobacco Road Sports Radio, which means it's time for a brand new live edition of the Desmond Johnson Show. My man David Glenn from the North Carolina Sports Network in the house. It's Sports Buffet Tuesday with David Glenn. We're going to hit on national championship fallout from last night. Ohio State is your national champion. We'll talk about the Notre Dame aspect of that for the ACC fans in the house. Best Super Bowl potential matchups. The Super Bowl coming up in a couple of weeks. Conference championship Sunday is this Sunday. We'll get you ready for that as well. What's up with the Hills and Hubert Davis? Is it time to panic for Tar Heel fans? And, of course, a huge matchup tonight in the ACC. Wake Forest hosting those Tar Heels at the Joel in Winston-Salem, where they've been almost unbeatable the past couple of years. Can Steve Forbes and the Wake Forest Demon Deacons actually win the ACC? We got a loaded show today. Let's go ahead and get into it and roll the intro. It's the Desmond Johnson Show.
Live with Desmond Johnson, son, the live is one. Represent NC to the fullest.
Yeah, welcome to the Carolinas. Everywhere you go, the sky is Carolina blue, the finest. Live action, feedback, the city needs that. I've been number one, no cap. Here's the recap. Adrenaline is my addiction. I'm about to relapse. Step on the turf if you won't and get your weed whacked. I'm going harder than a martyr on the starter end. It's the heart of man, that's a rap like a cardigan. I'm breaking records, it's 4th and inches, I count the seconds. The over-under's my roar of thunder, my secret weapon. Yeah, the game is to be told. I don't break, I break modes. Follow me on Tobacco Road.
Live with Desmond Johnson, son, the live is one. Represent NC to the fullest.
And it is a brand new edition of the Desmond Johnson Show, brought to you by Emergency Responders Credit Union in Winston-Salem. If you are an emergency responder in the Triad looking for financial services, Emergency Responders Credit Union is for you. Over off of Link Road in Winston-Salem. David Glenn in the house from the North Carolina Sports Network. What's going on, brother? How you doing, man?
I am doing great, Des. Always good to be with you.
So we're going to just jump into it because I got a bunch of stuff I want to hit with you real quick, as always, in the Sports Buffet. Only a few are qualified to enter the Sports Buffet and actually come out unscathed, and DG is the main one that can come in and out and hit a bunch of topics at the same time and give you all the stuff you need during your lunch break. I wanted to start off with the national championship last night. Of course, Ohio State defeats Notre Dame to win the national championship 31-20. Notre Dame, in terms of, did they prove they don't need a conference by making it to the national championship game? Because that was kind of the ACC playoff. Did they really need a conference, in your opinion?
Well, I think Notre Dame's been really clear on this over the years. There's three things that matter most to them beyond the obvious. They love their football independence. They've been independent for 100+ years. They're still a national brand, et cetera. But they've always said, number one, they have to have a TV contract that they're happy with. And they do have that one-on-one contract with NBC. Those dollars are huge. That is signed well into the future. So that's one for one. Number two, they've always said they have to be happy with the home for all their other sports. And as a member of the Atlantic Coast Conference, they don't have to worry about men's basketball and all their other Olympic sports. So that's 2 for 2. And the third thing that's most important to their athletic directors over the years is, do they have an avenue to a national championship in football based on whatever the system is at the time? And they said just last week that even though they're not eligible for a bye in this 12-team college football playoff, right? You can't get the bye unless you win a conference. They're not in a conference. They just said, again, that they're okay with the current system. They believe they have a path to the national championship. They obviously just showed it, just came up one game short against Ohio State. But as long as those three things stay in place, we're not going to see the end of Notre Dame football anytime soon. And that's the message from the university president there, the athletic director at Notre Dame, and all the people who have rotated through those positions over many decades at this point.
Now that it's over, do you feel that the 12-team playoff was a success? Do you think it was too many teams, too little teams? Because I've already heard now them rumbling about maybe getting 16 teams, and I felt like it might have been 4 too many. Maybe 8 was the magic number they should have got to and stayed there, but they're not going to go backwards. So now that you can look back on it from a macro view. Was it a success? Was the best team in the country crowned the national champion last night?
To me, it was a success story for a lot of reasons. Number one, there was a time in college football that a bunch of guys smoking cigars in the media were deciding who the national champion was. I mean, how ridiculous was that when every other sport at every other level was having some kind of bracket style playoff, to determine a champion? Middle school lacrosse in Bangladesh was determining their champion through a bracket, and top level college football was the only one that really wasn't, basically, in our country. And I'm glad it's different now. I thought the fact that in November there were still 20 teams that could make the 12-team bracket, I thought that added intrigue to the regular season. In some ways, the regular season is less important, but in other ways, the regular season's more important because more teams' results matter later in the season. Whereas under the 4-team playoff, for example, we knew that the Final Four were going to come from maybe 8 teams. Starting in November, man, there might be 25 teams on November 1st that had a chance to end up in one of those 12 slots. So that's more fan bases that have more reasons to pay attention for a longer period, and that's good for the sport. And we saw tons of games, whether conference championships or playoff games, with 10 million plus TV viewers. That's still a very good number. For example, college basketball almost never gets more than 4 or 5 million for a game until you get to the NCAA tournament. College football keeps cranking out huge TV numbers, really short of only the NFL's TV numbers. And that's another sign for the health of the sport. And I was happy to see, names like Boise State and Arizona State and others that you don't see as often as Ohio State and Notre Dame and some of the traditional heavyweights that we've gotten used to seeing over a long period.
And like Arizona State, you mentioned them. They were probably part of the most exciting game in the college playoff, that Texas quarterfinal game that they were in. So I do like that. I don't know how they're going to do. There does seem to be an issue with seeding, I guess. I don't know. They're going to have to figure that out, because even that it's really more the eyeball test, really, more than anything. It's like it's hard to kind of put, well, they should be number 3 because they're in the SEC and that kind of logic or whatever. I don't think that works anymore. If anything, it felt like watching last night, you can buy a national championship, because it felt like Ohio State was just basically a $20 million NIL roster that they had put together and made it all the way through. And luckily for them, didn't have to run across Michigan along the way to to win the national championship. And then also, again, with the Notre Dame aspect, you mentioned the TV deal they have with NBC and everything else. I always felt like they could still keep that and be a part of the ACC. But last night, and really the past month, kind of proved to Notre Dame they don't need it. Like, they don't really need to do it. And if they're willing to just play an extra game in the playoff and forego having that bye, they're getting money for playing the extra game. So it's like, and it's probably going to be a home game if it's Notre Dame, which it was. So I can see both aspects of it. Shout out to the Ohio State Buckeyes. I have a family up in Cleveland who are probably still up right now celebrating the national championship for Ohio State. I want to get over to the NFL real quick. Of course, Conference Championship Sunday is set. We have the Philadelphia Eagles, your Philadelphia Eagles, taking on the upstart. I shouldn't call them upstart. They won 12 games in the regular season. The Washington Commanders, who have taken these playoffs by storm. Rookie Jalen Daniels is playing fantastic. They are allergic to punting. Like, they do not punt at all. Like, it's crazy watching them play football. And then, of course, the marquee matchup in the AFC on Sunday at 6:00 is the Buffalo Bills traveling to Arrowhead to take on Pat Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs, who are trying to do what no team has ever done before, and that's three-peat in the Super Bowl era. Out of those 4, give me, now we know you're an Eagles fan, but give me, out of those 4, what is the most potential juiciest Super Bowl matchup you can come up with out of those 4, with the storylines going on, everything with the 4 respective teams?
That's a fun question, because I think you could go in a lot of different directions with it. You mentioned the historical angle. Certainly there would be a lot of attention on the Kansas City Chiefs attempting to become the first three-peat in the history of the Super Bowl era in the National Football League. That's a really, really big deal. If it were Chiefs-Eagles, that would be a rematch of what was a phenomenally entertaining game 2 years ago, right? 38-35 down to the wire. Andy Reid against his former franchise. This time it would be 2 good quarterbacks, really, no matter which of these 4 teams end up facing each other, right? Jaden Daniels, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts. That you can't lose really with those 4 stories. But you know the deal. The fun part is no matter which matchup we end up getting in the Super Bowl, it's going to be fun because Chiefs-Eagles would be historic in that one way I just mentioned, but Washington-Buffalo would be historic in the sense of the Bills being that eternal knocking on the door but can't kick it down, Super Bowl runner-up. That fan base has been yearning for all of eternity for their first Super Bowl champion. And then a team that many of us grew up watching as a traditional power, Washington, through the Daniel Snyder era, they were mostly asleep and irrelevant. So you can't lose, really. I think Chiefs-Eagles would be fascinating. Mahomes against one of the best defenses in the NFL, Philly. But no matter what we end up with, I think the NFL is going to win.
Yeah, you mentioned one of them that I kind of landed on. So the past 2 weeks, I've been watching the Washington games in full, the Washington Tampa game and the wild card round, and then this past week. There's something about what's going on in Washington right now. Every once in a while you see a team during this time of the year in the NFL where you can't put your finger on it, but just like something is just clicking with all aspects of their offense, defense, special teams. Everything just looks like they are in sync, and like maybe more so than any of the other teams that are left, except for maybe the Bills, where it just feels like, I don't want to say destiny, but I'm really starting to lean towards Washington's going to get to the Super Bowl. And it's weird to say that because everything you just said, the whole Daniel Snyder era, they have a rookie quarterback that's probably the best rookie quarterback I've ever seen in his rookie year. Like, he does not look like a rookie at all. Like, everything I just saw with Jalen Daniels, and I'm going to talk with Jonathan Stewart about it on Believe in Panthers later this week. For those who are looking for that today, Stu is in San Diego all week, so we'll be doing that probably Friday morning. But we were talking about it, and I didn't realize until yesterday that Jalen Daniels had asked teams looking to draft him that they needed to be involved in like AI and like this virtual training stuff that he's doing, where apparently he's going through training like with the goggles on or whatever, but he's doing it like 1.75 times the speed of regular speed. So when he gets out into the field, everything's already slower. And I was like, that makes so much sense, because when I'm watching him, it looks like everything's running slow to him. But usually it takes a year or two for the great ones to really see that and get there. We saw with Bryce Young. We literally watched it right in front of us. It get really fast and then it start to slow down for him. Jalen came out like that from day one. And I never understood what he was doing until yesterday when I read that. I was like, oh, okay, that makes a little bit of sense. But Buffalo, Washington popped up in my head for the sentimental reasons and everything else. And for those that don't know, like northern implants or maybe moved down to North Carolina, Washington was our team. Like North Carolina claimed the Washington franchise throughout the 80s, the Hogs, the 3 championships, Joe Gibbs, Doug Williams, all that stuff. We were Washington fans here. The game at 1:00 every Sunday in North Carolina was the Washington Redskins. And then at 4:00, it was probably the Dallas Cowboys. So you kind of knew what you were going to get here. And it didn't go away until we got the Panthers in the mid-90s. And to this day, I have friends that are longtime Washington friends that are mad at Panthers and Panther fans because they took that afternoon slot away from Washington and North Carolina, and now you got to get DirecTV or whatever to do it. So you're right. They've been in a slumber for about 20 years. Washington, in my opinion, is an NFL blue blood in terms of championships won and notoriety and running a decade. And Washington has all those boxes checked. And if they can get there against Buffalo, who would have had to have gone through probably the 3-time MVP in Lamar Jackson in Baltimore, and that game was nuts. That could have went either way, but Bills come out victorious in it. And to slay Pat Mahomes and the Chiefs at Arrowhead in a conference championship that only Tom Brady has ever done before, like, that's a good story too. And I felt like the Bills have been the most consistent all year. But then you've got the Kansas City Chiefs, who are just motoring along. They went 15-2 in the regular season. Ho hum, no big deal. We don't even have all of our offensive pieces here. And now they're all back. Now they're all together, and they're just now starting to figure things out. And Travis Kelce is now awake. So it's like, do you bet against Kansas City in January? Like, at this point, 5 years, 6 years in, like, is that feasible? Can Buffalo beat Kansas City at Arrowhead, basically, is what I'm asking you here. Do you think that's even possible? I
think they can. I mean, if you look at the Chiefs' numbers during the regular season, just points for, points against, it did not translate to 15-2. Their pure numbers were not so dominant that if you didn't see their record, you would have guessed that sort of dominating 15-2 record over 17 games. But here they are, and they have Pat Mahomes on their side, and they have Andy Reid on their side, and they have many of those pieces you described back and ready to go and closer to full health, et cetera. And they're brutally hard to beat at Arrowhead. Now, Josh Allen in Buffalo, of course, the only team that the Chiefs' 2 losses, remember, one was at the end of the season when they rested a lot of their key guys.
Yeah, they gave it to
the other was the Buffalo Bills. Now, that game was in Buffalo, so factor that in. But, Josh Allen is an absolutely dynamic player who is capable of doing what Brady did and leading his team to a victory at Arrowhead, even against that legendary coach, even against that future Hall of Fame quarterback in Pat Mahomes. It's going to be fun. Again, the NFL can't lose. There are 4 fun, fantastic, intriguing teams remaining. And no matter what the matchup is, in a world where it's harder and harder to get enormous TV audiences, they're going to get 100 million plus for this Super Bowl, I believe, no matter which 2 teams end up there.
It's funny. I'm probably one of the few people, maybe you too. We're probably the 2 people that don't have TikTok or aren't on TikTok or whatnot. And you just mentioned the whole thing about television audiences being fractured. And I was talking to my wife about it because she's a huge TikTok user. Matter of fact, I think she's listening to it right now. Yeah, so I think she's down the hall on it right now. And I saw the valuation for it was like $50 billion or something. And I was trying to explain to her, it's like, well, imagine it like this. It's like if someone tried to buy CBS in 1975. You know what I mean? Like it's become like this channel where everyone is at and everyone's going to, and it's not so much about the money that's in it. It's about the amount of eyeballs that it can attract and what they can do with those eyeballs down the road. It's really more about potential than it is what they're actually making money wise right now. And you mentioned the thing with the fractured television audiences. Live sports are really the only thing, and really the NFL in particular, and college football, but the NFL is still king when it comes to like live sports. You're going to get 25, 28, 35 million viewers on both of these games. And then Lord knows what the Super Bowl viewership is going to be this year with it being spread out all over the place. I'd be remiss to not mention Saquon Barkley and the Philadelphia Eagles in this whole thing because we didn't talk about them. There's a storyline there too. Remember, Saquon had an opportunity to break the single season rushing record and they held him out and they sat him out for the last game. And the sentiment was, all right, well, you better get to the Super Bowl. You better win it. If you're going to not go after that record, it better be for something. So there's something on the line for all of these teams. Washington feels like the loosest, like they're not supposed to be here. So it's like they can kind of crash the party, but they feel like they're playing the best to me. Again, they don't punt. They never punt. Like they literally just go and score touchdowns. And if you can drop 45 points on the number 1 seed in their house, that was an eye opener for me. I was like, okay, we need to start paying attention to the Washington Commanders because they've got something cooking here that I can't put my finger on, but it almost feels like 2015 Carolina, where it's like there's just something happening where they're just finding ways to win these close games. He had a Hail Mary. They won it at the end. I think it was against the Eagles, wasn't it? Like earlier this year. Or wasn't that the Eagles?
They beat the Eagles. One of the only teams that beat the Eagles.
Right. So like if there was one team the Eagles probably didn't want to see in these playoffs, it was probably Washington. So we'll see how that's going to go. That's going to be the early game on Sunday. We'll talk some a little more about that later on in the week when I have former NFL safety George Teague on with us. Let's hop into the ACC real quick before I get you out of here. What's up with Hubert Davis and the Carolina Tar Heels? We were feeling good. 4-game winning streak. Everything's great. Then Stanford comes along, and I don't think Carolina overlooked them, but I think they weren't prepared for their ability to score, and they fall to Stanford on the last second layup by a former Duke Blue Devil, no less, 72-71 on Saturday in Chapel Hill. It was a quad 3 game. It wasn't going to benefit Carolina if they won it, but it was going to hurt them if they lost it. And now they're in a situation where they're entering the tough part of their schedule, having to face Wake Forest tonight at the Joel, where Wake Forest is almost unbeatable the past couple of years under head coach Steve Forbes. Starting off on the Carolina side, was the Stanford game kind of a fluke, or do you take the overall 5-6 game sample you got from Carolina where their defensive stats and everything were up and everything else? Are you worried about the Tar Heels? Because now I'm seeing rumblings of people going, hey, we need to start having the conversation about Hubert Davis and yada, yada, yada. Are you worried yet, or is it just the nature of the ACC this year?
I think it really boils down to, yes, there is some concern. I mean, if you're the head coach at Carolina and there's a chance that you're going to miss the NCAA tournament twice in your first 4 years. That would be a disaster by UNC standards, even though, of course, Hubert's 2 good years were a trip to the national championship game and last year an ACC regular season title. So those
1 seed, yeah.
That's about as up and down a roller coaster as you can have for your first 4 years. But I think whereas I am impressed by how Carolina mostly has played defense this season. They don't have the traditional big guy. They don't have a traditional rim protector. On the plus side, Carolina has those guys playing defense passionately and together. Seth Trimble's a brilliant individual defender, but they're working pretty well as a team defensively, with a few exceptions. The problem for Carolina, I think, is offensively, where those guards just have not developed enough positive chemistry yet. I mean, RJ Davis was a 40% three-point shooter last year, and he's 28%. Now, you can blame part of that on no Armando Bacot down low, taking pressure off the perimeter guys. But you don't go from 40% to 28% just because there's no Armando. It means you're not being set up for the same, free space and open shots that you were over the last few years. And that means RJ Davis, Elliot Cadeau's also under 30% from three-point land. It means the freshman Ian Jackson, the veteran Seth Trimble, Cadeau, and Davis have to figure out a way to have better chemistry offensively where they're helping each other get more easy buckets. Because it's the Heels offense that's really holding them down in those games, including against Stanford. Stanford's not a great defensive team, but the Tar Heels failed to exploit that, and then it ends up being a nail-biter at the end. I still think Carolina is going to prove to be an NCAA tournament-worthy team, but, man, they are playing with fire, and they have a tough stretch of games here coming up, not just the trip to Wake Forest, but Pitt and Duke and Louisville, and they've got a tough road ahead, but it's also an opportunity to prove that they are NCAA tournament worthy if they can get that offense in gear.
They do have some quad one opportunities, a lot of them. They're all stacked up here, starting off here tonight at the Joel. It's a 9:00 game on ACC Network and ESPN. Wake Forest 14-4 overall, 6-1 in ACC, hosting Carolina tonight. Carolina 12-7, 5-2 in the ACC. The Deacs have won 7 over the last 8 games. The Tar Heels have won 4 of the last 5 until they lost to Stanford on Saturday. Wake Forest went up to Blacksburg and defeated Virginia Tech on Saturday, 72-63, getting that road win in the ACC. Hunter Silas is playing great. He scored 24 points. That's his 7th straight 20-point game. Cam Hildress added 21 points. The Deacs, and I'm sure if you ask a Demon Deacon fan, they would tell you this in the streets, but the Demon Deacons are off to their best start in ACC play since a guy named Tim Duncan was walking around campus in the 96-97 season. This is their first 5-game win streak in the ACC in 2 decades. I asked this question. It's a loaded one because we'll have to answer this question by the end of Saturday night, probably the way this week is setting up. But can Wake Forest win the ACC? And I asked this question because we've been basically saying it's Duke and everyone else pretty much for the past 2 months now. But the Deacs have kind of just been coasting along here underneath the radar, partly because of who they've played, I guess, but partly because who's at the top of the ACC with Duke, and they're getting a lot of the notoriety right now. But Wake is right there. And a fun fact, Duke has not won in the Joel in 2 years. And they're coming to the Joel on Saturday. Wake can do a whole lot for their resume this week, taking on Carolina tonight and Duke on Saturday. After watching them play and knowing what's at the top of the conference right now, not just Duke, Louisville's up there as well. There's some teams up there that I think by the end of the year, the committees are going to recognize are pretty strong candidates for March Madness. Can Wake Forest actually win the ACC? Do you think there's a shot, or do you feel like Duke or whoever is just more talented, or whatever you may think? But we got enough sample size here. What are your thoughts on Wake, and can they pull this off?
Yeah, to me, the 3 best teams in the ACC right now obviously start with Duke, but also Louisville and Clemson, to me, belong in that top 3. And then after that, it's going to be intriguing to see whether the Tar Heels get better, whether the Demon Deacons get better. The one reservation I have about picking Wake to win a regular season or make a run at an ACC tournament title is they need more offensive diversity. Hunter Salas was first team All-ACC last year. I think he's going to be first team all ACC again this year. He's at almost 20 points per game. As you said, he's been on that roll lately. He is just an absolutely magnificent player. But Wake is up and down offensively based upon the fact that Hunter Salas doesn't always get enough help offensively. The good news for Steve Forbes, and remember, he's trying to make the NCAA tournament for the first time in his 5 years at Wake Forest. So an ACC title would be a dream scenario. He's got to kick the March Madness door down. And to kick that door down, the good news is, to me, this is the best defensive team that Steve Forbes has had at Wake Forest. They're just grittier defensively. Trayvon Spillers, the App State transfer, just helps them get some defensive rebounds or loose balls. They're just tougher mentally and physically. So defense, I think, is kind of the foundation of Wake, I think, and hope for them that they make the tournament. It would only be their second NCAA tournament trip at Wake, Des, since 2010.
That's crazy.
That is crazy. So they're good enough defensively. What they need to do, and in this winning streak, they plugged in Tylar Johnson, the Louisville transfer, the only true point guard on the entire roster. After earlier this season, there were games he barely played at all. He's now their starting point guard. And since he became the starting point guard, the Deacs are 5-0 or 6-0. And it has allowed Cam Hildreth and Hunter Salas to just be freed up a little bit from those overwhelming ball handling duties. Hildreth and Salas, neither is really a point guard. And when Johnson's in there, even if Johnson doesn't have huge numbers himself, he just seems to make the machine work better. And Salas maximizes his offensive opportunities on the wing. So that's part of the challenge for the Tar Heels. Force somebody not named Hunter Salas to beat you. And one of the challenges for the Deacs is, as they get closer to March, Hunter Salas just needs more help offensively, because as the schedule gets tougher, you're just not going to win with that better defense at Wake. You have to try to win with some more offensive diversity, where it's not Hunter Salas producing every big bucket for the Deacs.
There is a brand new game day preview we did at the beginning of the year. We decided to start expanding our press coverage in terms of ACC Big Four, Charlotte Hornets, Panthers, etc. Mitch Fry is one of our new writers that's come on board the past couple of weeks. He's done a fantastic job. He has a game day preview up right now at sportscarolinamonthly.com. North Carolina at Wake Forest. It's a game day preview. You should be able to find it on the homepage and get in there. But he gives you the nitty gritty and the key points for tonight. One of the things I pulled from it that I didn't realize when we were talking about it off camera, the Deacs are 9-0 at the Joel this year. They were 16-1 last season. So they're 25-1 at the Joel over the past 2 years. They've beat Duke twice in the past 2 years at the Joel. It's turned into a really hard place for road teams to get a win. So this isn't like a cupcake. Carolina can walk in here and get right on get right back on the right track type of deal. This is going to be a problem coming in here tonight. Hunter Salas, like I said earlier, he scored 20 points in 7 consecutive games. He'll probably have to carry the Deacs again tonight on offense. Ian Jackson was held to 1 field goal against Stanford. Yep. He had a streak of 20-point performances before that. Jackson feels like a bucket to me anytime he has the ball. So I would feel like they're going to probably let him cook a little bit tonight. I will say the insertion of Drake Powell and Ian Jackson into the starting lineup, the 2 freshmen for Carolina, that seems to correlate to when they started playing better defensively and just more cohesively, with Seth Trimble moving to the bench when he got injured. I think it was a concussion, I believe is what it was. And then he missed like 3 games, and Jackson cracked the starting lineup, never got out of it. And now Trimble's coming off the bench, which, to be honest, might have been the best play anyway, because they needed somebody on that second group to kind of get them going offensively. And Trimble struggled a little bit since the beginning of the year when he came out hot, kind of lulled for a little bit. And now they're just trying to figure this out. But I have liked Jalen Washington. He's played a little bit more confidently the past couple of games. He's going to be big going down the stretch here. And again, what you said with RJ, I'm starting to feel like maybe the team might look better if RJ had left, last year. Sometimes maybe you stay a year too long. And I understand why he stayed. He's making like $2 million in NIL money to play basketball at Carolina for a year. Like, oh no, like, oh, woe is him. But it maybe he had too much pressure on himself at the beginning of the year, maybe taking too many shots he shouldn't have, or I don't know. He's still a former first team All-American. So, and ACC player of the year. So you don't want to just like push those guys out the door. It just feels like one of those years where Carolina has too many players at one position and not enough at another. And it's happened a couple years before. I am a little concerned about Hubert, though, and what's going with these late game situations, because it feels like whenever they lose a game, it's a late game type situation where something just didn't go their way, or somebody hits a shot at the end, or there's a defensive breakdown, something happens, and they end up losing those
Stanford
games.
runs the same inbounds play 4 times and gets 3 layups.
Yes,
I mean, that's you got to tip your cap to the opposing coaching staff when they do that repeatedly. But it also raises questions about the other coaching staff.
Yeah.
If you didn't prepare for their favorite baseline inbounds play.
Yeah, you don't see this.
And it ends up being 6 easy points in a game decided by what? 1. Right?
And they don't see the whole. You're right. It was the same play. They just ran like this little double curl route thing, basically on the right side, where one guy comes through, second guy comes through, gets the pick. He's wide open, layup, score. And it worked like 4 times. And by the third time, I was like, hey, wait a minute. Like, they've been doing this all game. What's going on here? And if I can see it from my living room, I'm hoping Hubert can see it from the sideline. But it's weird because, again, it's so high and so low. You beat Duke in the Final Four. You get to the national championship game, and you're up 16 at half. And you basically lose because Armando Bacot's playing on 1 foot. Then the next year, you miss it completely. Then the next year, you win the ACC regular season with 17 wins in the ACC, most all time, and then you get a 1 seed. And now this year, you're kind of, are you getting in? Like, it's this up, down thing. And I don't know if it's necessarily Hubert or if it's the nature of college basketball right now, because I do think that NIL is starting to catch up. The SEC in particular, I think you're starting to see money that was coming in for football or whatever leaking over into the basketball programs, which is why you've got 6, 7, 8 SEC teams ranked in the next, like the top 15 or 20 right now, where the ACC is struggling because they've been behind kind of putting that stuff together. And I worry that they're going to be behind the 8 ball going forward. It's no coincidence to me that Duke kind of had their NIL stuff together like a year or so ago. Yeah. And look at them. Like they're kind of moving along, and I'm hoping Carolina will be able to do the same thing, but it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough to catch up to the Kentuckys and the Tennessees of the world in basketball, which is crazy to say.
Yeah, it's tricky. There's a lot of positive observations to make about Hubert Davis. As I said, along with Duke, the Tar Heels are playing the best defense in the entire conference. So that's partly attributable to coaching. Hubert Davis recruited Ian Jackson and Drake Powell. There are 350 teams in America that would love to have freshmen like Ian Jackson and Drake Powell. So again, you got to give Hubert Davis and his staff credit for that. But some of the fair questions, what's up with the backcourt chemistry, where those guys are just not fitting together very well. And then to your point about name, image, likeness, Carolina for a half century plus has been built in part on dominant low post play. The idea that Carolina would not have a single big man that can average even 10 points per game, I've done the research. It hasn't happened.
I was going to say, I've never seen that before in my life.
No, you've never seen it because it's never happened since Dean Smith took over in the early 1960s, before we were born. I mean, Carolina has had a double-digit scoring big man every year for literally more than a half century until this year.
Wow.
And so there's in-season coaching where there's some bouquets you can toss to Hubert Davis and some hard questions you can ask. But it's the roster construction out of season where I think Hubert has even more difficult questions to answer, because Carolina, built on the low post, doesn't go into a seat. With all due respect to Jalen Washington and Van Allen Lubin, they play hard. They're unselfish. They're trying to do what the coaches tell them.
They are trying.
They're just not Carolina starting caliber big men. And the Carolina way, has certain types of point guards, certain types of wing guards, certain types of low post scorers. And the best Carolina teams have had like 3 or 4 6'10" to 7'1" guys that can score in the post and defend the rim and all that. And they don't have any of them this year. So again, it's Hubert's job to make the NCAA tournament with the roster that he has constructed. And if he does that, well, then that's, another step in the right direction. If he misses for the second time in 4 years, there's going to be some hard questions around Hubert Davis and Chapel Hill.
Yeah, I don't want to be there. I don't want to be in that part, because I don't even know where you go like at that point with the way everything is. You kind of handpicked Hubert to navigate you through this NIL transfer portal, new world of college basketball. And it's weird as a Carolina fan, like you said, with the big men part. it's just strange to not have a guy you can just dump it down into. Although I will say the past 2 games, I'd mentioned it out loud and maybe I've spoken into existence, but the past 2 games or so, I've noticed they have started dumping the ball down into the paint, like running actual plays for the post players. Whereas before they were just kind of standing out, picking up at the top of the key and going in and rebounding or whatever, but they were never looking for the ball. And now I'm seeing them actually throw it into Jalen Washington, throw it into Van Leuven, and actually have them work a little bit where everybody's spaced out. Maybe that's what they do to get those guys going. But I think between the 2 of them, they are basically averaging roughly around what Armando was doing last year by himself. So beggars can't be choosers, but still, we'll see what happens. We'll find out a lot about the top of the ACC when this week is over, and it starts tonight. Wake Forest hosting Carolina, 9:00 tip-off at the Joel. Again, the Deacs are 9-0 at the Joel this season. They are 16. Well, they were 16-1 last year. They are 25-1 at the Joel since last year. So it's a very, very tough place to play in the ACC. If Carolina comes out of there with a win tonight, they will definitely earn it. We need to get you guys out of here, get you back to work. DG, appreciate you being on as you're on every other week with us here in the Sports Buffet. Go check out the North Carolina Sports Network on YouTube, one of the fastest growing sports networks in the state of North Carolina, giving you everything you need content-wise, especially in the ACC. They're knee-deep in it over there, so definitely go check them out. DG and the David Glenn Show, you can catch that over there as well. I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. We'll probably preview some more ACC hoops and a couple more surprises too. But appreciate everybody stopping through. This is the Desmond Johnson Show. We'll see you on Wednesday.